That first season was just awful. Despite putting up some good numbers, Son got overshadowed by the trio of Kane, Lamela and Dele Alli, not only witnessing Tottenham's greatest ever run for the Premier League title from the bench, but getting the chance to play in what was virtually their title match, scoring, and watching them choke regardless. So listen to this. Everyone loves Heung Min Son. They say he is adorable, always smiling, just too nice. Which is true, but also precisely what has made him so easy to underestimate, so dangerous. As generally Yi Sun-shin once wrote, never let the enemy know you. The moment he understands you, you've already lost the battle. In the Japanese invasion of Korea, Yi Sun-shin never lost a single battle. At one point, he led his 13 ships to victory against a fleet of 200, and in his final battle, with his last breath, he ordered his own nephew to hide his body, take his armor, and carry on the battle in his place, so that his men would not be discouraged by his death. That day, his troops beat Japan and put an end to the war, only finding out about his death the day after. And I believe, in his own way, Heung Min Son has also mastered the art of war, because behind that smile, behind those tears, he's much tougher than anyone knows. Look, his father was forced to give up football at 28 following a career-ending injury, and only 2 years later, Son was born and made into a project baby. His whole existence was centered around football. There was no academy, nothing. His dad insisted he had to perfect the basics of passing, dribbling, and ball control before he was even introduced to shooting. This was no hobby. It wasn't meant to be fun. According to Son himself, any disobedience was repaid with extra training, at one point forcing him to do kick-ups with his weak foot for 4 hours straight, restarting the clock every time the ball hit the floor. In his own words, after about 3 hours, I was seeing 3 balls. My eyes were bloodshot. The floor looked red. The stories he tells of his dad are so ungodly that for the longest time, journalists had a hard time believing them. That was until years later, Son opened his own academy in South Korea, hired his dad as a coach, and was quickly hit with a child abuse lawsuit after his dad beat one of the kids with a corner flag. Regardless, no matter how awful his methods were, they worked. Those years made Son so incredibly two-footed. Van der Vaart has been quoted saying that, "I don't think even Son knows if he's right or left-footed," and the results were pretty simple. After only 2 years of academy football, Son was accepted into the infamous Made in Korea program and was flown out along 6 of the best young players in the country to a sort of apprenticeship at Hamburg. 5,000 miles away from home, Son binge-watched dubbed episodes of SpongeBob, trying his best to learn wherever German he could, hoping to fit in as he was relentlessly bullied for being Asian. 1 year later, only 2 of the kids who flew alongside him remained, and no one was offered a contract, not even Son. He even traveled over to England for trials at Blackburn and Portsmouth, but claimed he felt too scared being there on his own, so he ended up back at his hometown, and had it not been for the Under-17 World Cup, he could be an absolute nobody today. Instead, he went for it, scored 3 goals, including the goal of the tournament, a screamer from 40 yards out against host Nigeria, hogging the spotlight among young stars like Isco Morata and Mario Götze, forcing Hamburg to come running, trying to fix their mistake, bringing him back, and watching as he flew up their ranks, from the under-19s to the reserves and then the first team, all in the space of a year. In his first preseason, he was already racking up 9 goals, the most in the squad, at one point coming in for his mentor Ruud van Nistelrooy and making a mockery of John Terry and Carvalho to score against Chelsea. And on his first ever Bundesliga start, he was already breaking the 39-year-old record of Manfred Kaltz, becoming the youngest ever goal scorer at Hamburg. And then it just kept going. By January, he was being named the league's Rookie of the Year. FIFA listed him as one of the most promising players in the world alongside Neymar and Hazard, and he had everyone in Korea deeming him as the new Shabum Kun. Arguably the best Asian player of all time, a 2-time UEFA Cup winner, Eintracht Frankfurt legend, and South Korea's all-time top scorer. But after a second preseason with 18 goals in 9 matches, yes, you heard that right, Son picked up a couple injuries that slowed him down, and then made one of the riskiest decisions a Korean player could ever make. He rejected a call-up to the Olympic Games in order to focus on club football. Look, with South Korea still technically at war with their neighbors, military service is not just mandatory, it's virtually impossible to escape, and lasts 3 whole years. Even for top-class footballers, the only way towards exemption is either any medal at the Olympics or, specifically, a gold medal at the Asian Games, and trust me, with only one of those to their name since 1978, you cannot waste any chances you get. For some perspective, Lee Kyun-ho was named Asian Player of the Season and then drafted into the military the very same year, virtually ruining his career. But he actually got to play in the second tier for the Army's football team while he was there. Son, however, never completed high school, so he wasn't even eligible for that. Regardless, in the short term, I guess you can say his bet sort of paid off. He showed up towards the end of the season, scored 2 goals that saved Hamburg from relegation, instantly becoming a starter because of that, and then kick-started his third year with a man-of-the-match performance and 2 goals against Borussia Dortmund, eventually becoming the only ever Korean to hit double digits in one of the top 5 leagues, aside from none other than Shabum Kun, leading Hamburg within 3 points of an Europa League spot and attracting interest from United, Chelsea, Dortmund, and, ironically, from Pochettino's Southampton, soon taking a move to Leverkusen and becoming their all-time record transfer at 10 million euros. However, as good as that sounded, I'm sure he reconsidered all of his decisions once he witnessed his own teammates take a bronze medal at the Olympics without him, all earning military exemption. Suddenly, even with Son impressing at Leverkusen, striking a hat-trick against his former teams just months into his time there, and famously leaving his teammates stunned during their preseason tour in South Korea as 30,000 fans flooded a shopping mall they were in trying to get a picture with him. No matter what, it felt like he had let his one chance at a normal career pass him by. Throughout the season, more goals and records came. He clutched Champions League qualification for Leverkusen. Over summer, he even played in the World Cup. But then, the club selfishly refused to let him go to the Asian Games, and just to rub salt on his wounds, his teammates took gold again. Meaning that once he hit 20 goal contributions for Leverkusen while scoring one of the goals of the season in the Champions League, and finally getting Tottenham to splash 30 million euros on him, making him the most expensive Asian player of all time, he was still in a race against time for his exemption, not to mention one against all the stereotypes associated with Asian players. You see, European football always saw Asian players as one of two, either marketing gimmicks only brought in to sell shirts and attract Asian sponsors, or tireless workers merely meant to run around non-stop, doing the grunt work so the real stars could shine. And at first, things would not be any different for Son. It would take years before they got over his nice smile and good manners, and finally allowed him to be the ice-cold killer he was always meant to be. That first season was just awful. Despite putting up some good numbers, Son got overshadowed by the trio of Kane, Lamela, and Dele Alli, not only witnessing Tottenham's greatest ever run for the Premier League title from the bench, but getting the chance to play in what was virtually their title match, scoring, and watching them choke regardless. One way or another, the same team who nearly got relegated made it all the way into the Europa League final, and though Son himself was only able to come in 23 minutes from the end, they won it. They actually won a trophy. Not one Tottenham fan was able to hold back the tears seeing Son lift that trophy after so many years watching him cry. He had done what Kane never could. And though obviously he isn't one for gloating, when they asked him what he felt about Kane winning the Bundesliga, he replied that they're different trophies. And we all know what that meant. Whether he'll admit it or not, Son is now Tottenham's all-time greatest. That's so bad that after going into the Olympics over summer and making it past Germany only to crash out to Honduras before he even got to play for a medal, he just collapsed on the floor crying. Once back in London, he was already informing the club of his decision to move back to the Bundesliga, hopefully joining Wolfsburg. And it was only on deadline day, after failing to sign either Mane or Zaha, that Pochettino convinced him to stay, with some sources claiming that his justification as to why he was benched so often was simply that it was easier to leave out because he wasn't one to make a fuss. Yeah, However, no matter how much things changed, it wasn't enough. That year, Son put down 21 goals and 8 assists, pretty much averaging a goal contribution a game. This man outperformed his expected goals by 109%. He was easily the deadliest finisher in the country, and yet, in their biggest game of the year, an FA Cup semi-final against Chelsea, Pochettino played him at left back. It's honestly embarrassing to look back at it. Not even the fact that this guy still took more Player of the Month awards than anyone else in the league was enough to wake them up. And it's hard not to think that with Son getting more minutes and in a more offensive role, maybe that second place finish could have been the Premier League title they've been so desperate for. But no. In his third year, more minutes came, but only at the expense of being pushed wider, though. Honestly, by then, that wasn't exactly the first thing on his mind. Not only did he have the World Cup in the summer, but right after came the Asian Games. His last chance to take a medal and be saved from military service, since before the next Olympic Games arrived, he'd have already turned 28, having no choice but to enlist. Look, the World Cup wasn't exactly the greatest omen. I mean, Son scored as they historically beat Germany, but they were out in the group stage regardless, and a month later, it was already time to play the most important tournament of his life, and let me tell you, he really played like his life depended on it. Having already scored the winner that put them in the knockouts following a disastrous defeat to Malaysia that forced them into the tougher side of the bracket, once in the quarters, they were up against Uzbekistan, who were up to 13 goals in 4 matches, meaning they were clearly not the favorites. Still, Son went in with an assist within 5 minutes, watched as they went behind 3-2, and then assisted another to go into extra time, finally making it through thanks to a penalty in the 118th minute. That's how close he got to shaving off his head and putting on a pair of military boots. However, regardless of how much more smoothly the next game went, with Son racking up another assist as they defeated Vietnam 3-1, the final would be the real nail-biter. Going against their rivals Japan, holding out all the way to the final whistle without a single goal, and moving on to extra time where Son assisted 2 goals as they barely clutched a 2-1 win. But most important of all, getting his military exemption and opening up the gates to offers from every club who had held out afraid of the outcome, Bayern came in instantly, Man United and Liverpool followed, but for a reason most could not understand, Son was now decided to stay at Tottenham, and it almost paid off. He started the next season by scoring a Messi-style solo goal against Chelsea, then went on a run of 19 goal contributions in 16 games, culminating with a goal against Dortmund to leave Tottenham with 1 foot in the Champions League quarter-finals, where, with Kane out injured, he took over and put 3 goals down against Guardiola's Man City to take the win on away goals, putting Tottenham in the semi-finals for the first time since 1962, and finally convinced Europe that he was worthy of superstar treatment. Being named the club's player of the season and getting nominated to the Ballon d'Or even if Tottenham would end up losing the Champions League final regardless, though even then there would still be a lot of people who only saw him as Harry Kane's sidekick. However, there would be a solution for that one. With Pochettino shockingly getting the sack just 5 months after the final, Mourinho came in and flipped it all around, moving Son into the center and playing Kane behind him as a number 10, immediately leading him to some of his best ever performances, famously going past the entire Burnley squad before scoring what was literally the goal of the year, earning him the Puskas Award, as Mourinho nicknamed him Sonaldo Nazario. And though that season would eventually get broken up by the pandemic, it didn't matter. Son took that time to recover from an injury, came back and clinched a place in Europe for his club, saving Mourinho's job and leapfrogging Harry Kane to his 2nd Player of the Year award, starting an all-out race for Robbie Keane's record of 3, with both pulling off absurd numbers the next year, 40 goal contributions for Son and 50 for Kane, combining for a league record 14 goals where one assisted the other, both making it to the Premier League Team of the Year and the FA Cup final, only for Tottenham to finish 7th regardless and have the board sack Mourinho 6 days before the final, pretty much sabotaging their own chance of taking a trophy. Regardless, now it was Kane who was taking a 2nd Player of the Season award, so of course, Son stepped up his game under Nuno Espírito Santo, but especially once Conte arrived, shocking everyone by coming from 9 goals behind to snatch the golden boot from Mohamed Salah, closing out the season with 12 goals in the final 10 matches, once again clutching Champions League qualification in the process. success and taking the fabled third player of the season award. The fact that he did this in the Hurricane era should tell you how special of a player he is, but the fact that he's called the Hurricane era should tell you how underrated he is as well. To make matters worse, the season after, he'd go on kind of a dry streak, as Kane not only quickly matched his record, but left to Bayern once it was confirmed they would not qualify for European football, giving up on Tottenham and taking the easiest route towards some silverware. Now alone, Son tried to explain that he'd been playing at 60% fitness all season, unable to get surgery to treat an hernia that left him in constant pain. But even after recovering and being handed the captain's armband, he struggled to keep Tottenham afloat. After all, it was his first time playing without Kane in 9 years, and yet another manager had just taken over the club. But regardless of any of that, he kept pushing, still hitting 27 goal contributions in the Premier League alone, winning an unbelievable 23 points for his team as they narrowly missed out on Champions League qualification, though this time it may have been fate. The next year, as Son was hit with injury after injury, missing 17 matches in total, Tottenham would collapse, ending up 17th in the table by the time the season was over, just one place over the relegation zone. With Son unable to help his team, either because his own body failed him or because he was outcasted onto the sidelines, he said everything to be one of the most depressing seasons of his career, but